India is the world's largest democracy. Modern democracies are based on ideals of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion. India, however, is failing to meet these standards. In fact, Indian Muslims face increasing threats to their freedom of speech, expression, and religion with each passing day. This picture shows an armed mob of Hindu nationalists razing a mosque to the ground, and they are armed, and they're doing this in defiance of court orders. Such incidents are commonplace in India, and they show the plight that Indian Muslims face today. Good morning, I'm Shan Abbas, and today I'll be discussing the impact of the Hindu nationalist movement on Indian Muslims. My research question is, since 2014, to what extent has the Hindu nationalist movement negatively affected the civil rights of Muslims in India? And my argument is a very stark one. Since 2014, the Hindu nationalist movement in India has negatively affected the civil rights of Muslims to a very great extent. This brings me to my first contention: inaction. By choosing to not legally prosecute Hindu nationalists that commit hate crimes against Muslims, the Indian government has enabled the far right. A huge example of the rise in Hindu nationalist sentiment in India and Hindu nationalist rhetoric is a Hindu nationalist conference held in December 2021, where speakers made shocking statements such as urging India to follow Myanmar's model of anti-Muslim genocide and urging their followers to be ready to kill and go to jail. Although such statements are illegal under Indian law, these individuals face little to no legal consequences. This is horrible news for Muslims in India because it demonstrated the lack of accountability against dangerous hate speech. A shocking incident involved over 100 Muslim women, including prominent journalists and activists, speaking out against the rise in anti-Muslim sentiment, being posted online as maids for sale. Alarming incidents such as this and the far-right conference are being met with radio silence by Indian politicians, political leadership, and law enforcement alike. Prime Minister Modi and his party's leadership's silence is extremely problematic for Muslims. It is said that silence is complicity, and when the vast majority of people who stoke the flames of anti-Muslim hatred are big supporters of Prime Minister Modi, and he can do something to moderate these extremist elements, yet he chooses to do little to nothing, this saying rings especially true. The far right, the violent far right, sees his silence as an endorsement and a green light to continue their activities. An alarming statistic from a 2019 NGO report showed that half of Indian police displayed anti-Muslim bias. And when half of law enforcement displays anti-Muslim bias, the law enforcement cannot be expected to defend the civil rights of Muslims in India or effectively stop and investigate anti-Muslim hate crimes. An example of this was seen in 2019 when almost 50 Muslims were killed in riots in New Delhi while they were protesting anti-Muslim legislation, yet their killers have roamed scot-free ever since. Muslim blood is being spilled on the streets, yet law enforcement are merely bystanders. This brings us to my second contention: legislation. The Indian government has enacted several policies on the federal and state level that have disenfranchised Muslims and stripped them of their civil rights. This chart shows the impressive electoral supermajority of the BJP in parliament, which is Prime Minister Modi's party. It is a ruling party that is running on the platform of uniting India under the premises of Hindu nationalism. Such an electoral supermajority gives the BJP a free rein to impose its ideology over the Indian constitution, which guarantees religious freedom for all. Milestone examples of anti-Muslim legislation that have been passed recently are the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register for Citizens, which bar Muslim refugees from gaining Indian citizenship. This is a blatant move to set Muslims aside from the general Indian citizenry, and it sets a dangerous precedent concerning the civil rights of Muslims in India. The government is blatantly ignoring the secular Indian constitution and dictating who can be and who cannot be an Indian citizen simply based on their religion. By denying Muslims the opportunity to become citizens just because of their religion, the Indian government is setting the precedent that Muslims do not have the same citizenship rights as Hindus in India. Another concerning trend is the rapid rise of so-called cow vigilantes. The sale and consumption of beef has been made illegal in many Indian states, owing to the holy status of the cow in Hinduism. However, the so-called cow vigilantes have taken the law into their own hands, and they have been involved in hunting down and lynching Muslims allegedly involved in the sale and consumption of beef without any concrete evidence. The failure of authorities to apprehend these mobs, the failure of authorities to act against these cow vigilantes, and the authorities actually prosecuting the victims themselves instead of the mobs shows their apathy to the violation of the civil rights of Indian Muslims. As seen in the College Board stimulus, a dangerous aspect of cultural synchronicity is harmful obedience, which causes people to comply or makes them more likely to comply with aggressive orders. Contextualized in modern-day India, this can be seen as Hindu nationalists mass voting for politicians with explicitly anti-Muslim agendas, being more susceptible to misinformation that portrays Muslims as terrorists and demonizes them, and acting on calls for violence against Muslim civilians. This brings me to my solutions. I propose that democratic governments worldwide and institutions, including the United States and the European Union, apply intense diplomatic pressure on the Indian government to preserve its secularity and to guarantee the rights of Muslims in India. Furthermore, if needed, such organizations and institutions should apply economic sanctions and political sanctions on individuals and legislatures that are stoking anti-Muslim hate and restricting the civil rights of Indian Muslims. However, there are some limitations to this solution. Firstly, India has a population of 1.3 billion, which is a huge population that makes it a very large market for raw materials, labors, and for selling products. And economic powerhouses in the West, such as the EU and the United States, may not want to lose access to this huge market. Furthermore, India is an important ally of the United States against the United States' Cold War with China. And the US and the West alike may not want to antagonize India and lose a key ally in their Cold War with China and their fight against Chinese influence. Now, as seen in this painting from the College Board stimulus, The Holdout by Norman Rockwell, where a woman is in a defiant stance against a crowd of men. Indian Muslims are a minority, just like this woman, resisting against their civil rights being taken away. Currently, they are outnumbered and they are being easily outpowered and outmaneuvered, and they desperately need the help of the international community to keep their dear way of life intact. These are my works cited. Thank you. Do you have any questions for me?
Excuse me. Yes, I do have two questions for you. First up, how did your research question evolve as you moved through the whole process?
So my research question evolved as I moved through the whole process because there are actually a lot of different aspects of Muslim life in India that are being impacted by this recent uptick in Hindu nationalism. Their socioeconomic status, the economic opportunities available to them, most importantly their civil rights, and even to an extent they have to cede many of the key components of their religion. But I think that as I went through my research, I found out that the most compelling argument lay in the erosion of their civil rights, and so that's what I chose to focus my research question on.
Okay. And if you had more time, what additional research would you conduct on this issue?
If I had more time, some more additional research I would conduct is the erosion of the civil rights of other minorities in India, such as Christians, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs, which is currently happening, which I wasn't able to include. But I think it's worthy showing how Hindu nationalists aren't simply targeting Muslims. Nobody's safe from their rhetoric.